There's a tension I carry in my body like a coiled spring. It's there in the way I brace when I speak, in the way I rehearse my responses in advance, in the way I watch for the tiniest signs that I've said something wrong again. It's a kind of social muscle memory. I expect to be misread. I expect to be punished. I expect people to turn on me. And even if they never do, the expectation never leaves. Because for so many of us who are autistic or ADHDers, that pattern of waiting for the judgment, the correction, the abandonment has been there for a long, long time. And it isn't just anxiety, it isn't just awkwardness, it's what happens when the world has taught you over and over again that who you are is a problem to be solved. Today, I want to talk about that, about the fear that follows us into every social interaction, the performance of empathy that can feel like theater, and the constant scanning, adjusting, and appeasing we do to survive. Let's call this what it is: complex trauma. And not the big, obvious kind we're used to hearing about, not one singular catastrophic event. The kind that builds slowly, drip by drip, over years of misattunement by others, misunderstanding our intentions, and micro-rejections. It's the trauma of being a kid who was always too much or too sensitive. The student who never quite understood the rules, but was still punished for breaking them. The friend who was dropped for being too intense, too negative, or too hard to deal with. The adult who masks so effectively they vanish from their own life. And the worst part is it's often invisible to the people around us, because so many of the things that cause this trauma are normalized, expected, even praised. By virtue of having a unique neurotype, we show up in unique ways in social environments, and our differences are often singled out. We start to feel hyperconscious of our difference because others point to them as if these differences are a flaw. So we end up over-apologizing, over-explaining, and over-functioning just to prove we deserve to exist in the room. When these things happen again and again, when others single you out for being problematic or difficult or too different, too weird, your brain starts to adapt. You become a master of making adjustments. You start preemptively scanning for threats, emotional, social, sensory. You shrink yourself, you shrink your differences, you harden yourself, you rehearse every word, and this is what it looks like to survive in a world that wasn't made for your brain. One of the ways we're expected to adjust on a day-to-day basis is through the performance of empathy. And that's not to say that a lot of us don't experience empathy. We do, we just manifest it differently. But because we're not showing it in the way that's expected of us by neurotypicals, we end up having to engage in some form of pantomime. I want to stress here that when I do this in social situations, I care deeply, but the way I access and express that care, like many neurodivergents, doesn't always line up with what the world expects. And so I've learned to do the right things, say the right words, modulate my tone, tilt my head, soften my voice, offer comfort in a way that looks and sounds right to neurotypical eyes and ears. The fact of the matter is, I'm often not feeling it in the moment. My brain is still catching up to whatever the situation is that's happening or being explained to me. My emotional response might be delayed, it might be flat, or it's completely inaccessible because of alexithymia or sensory overwhelm, or sheer cognitive overload. So I, like many neurodivergents, run through a kind of script in my head. This person is telling me something painful. What would I want if I were in their shoes? What words might help? What tone might feel safe? And then I offer something that looks like empathy, even when I haven't located the emotion behind it yet. If I'm successful, that's a big if, because I'm not always successful, and when I'm not, I get into trouble. But if I am successful, to neurotypicals, this often looks completely natural. They don't see the internal labor, the rehearsal, the self-monitoring, the desperate scanning of facial cues to gauge, did I get it right? This isn't me faking it per se, but it's me being effortful, intentional, giving the best approximation I can in that moment. It's me showing up even if the emotion hasn't caught up to me yet. And I know that if I don't do this pantomime, If I pause too long, or I don't say the right words, or I fail to mirror the other person's distress, people will assume I don't care, that I'm cold, that I've let them down. And that can be the death knell to a relationship. This is why I, like so many neurodivergents, learn to perform empathy in the way others recognize. And most of the time, I think it lands. But it doesn't always feel natural. It can feel like a costume. And when I do share something hard and somebody doesn't respond with the same effort, when they don't show attunement in the way I've learned to offer it, that hurts. And it makes me withdraw. Because if I'm going to go through all that effort for someone else, I need to feel it's safe to expect at least some version of that in return. And as big as neurotypicals are on everybody performing empathy or providing it in a social situation, not all of them do. And not all of them are good at it, especially when confronted with challenges that are specific to neurodivergence. If we share that we are struggling with something, they might not be able to wrap their head around it or respond in an empathic way. So I've talked about the intense pressure we feel as neurodivergents in social situations to meet neurotypical expectations, the degree to which we perform and put on an empathic act to meet the neurotypical's needs in any given situation. So I've talked about the social performance that's expected of neurodivergence in social situations involving neurotypicals, about the incredible pressure we feel to hit this bar to show empathy when it's demanded of us. And I've also talked about the fear of not getting it right and the punishment that often follows. And this punishment can lead me sometimes to want to withdraw in social situations. My face might go flat in terms of expression. My voice might drop to a monotone. My sentences might become short, clipped, practical. I'm retreating inward because in some situations, that's the safest place to be. Now, this could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because I'm experiencing sensory overload. The lights are too bright. The room is too loud. The conversation is moving too fast, with too many unwritten rules I'm expected to follow. And I find myself shutting down to protect my nervous system. Other times, it's emotional. The overwhelm of alexithymia sets in. I know something is going on inside me, but I can't name it, or something is going on outside me among the people I'm spending time with, and I can't read it. So I freeze. Because if I move, speak, or react in the wrong way, something might go wrong. For many neurodivergents, especially those of us with a history of being misunderstood, the default setting becomes freeze first, speak later, if at all. Sometimes we retreat because we fear, often rightfully so, that we're going to put our foot wrong. So we retreat, we adopt a bratty resting face, and this bratty resting face is usually an indicator we're in defense mode. We've learned painfully that showing up the wrong way, expressing the wrong emotion or thought at the wrong time can have consequences. That speaking too honestly, reacting too visibly, or blurting out a thought that hasn't been perfectly polished can lead to social consequences like rejection, judgment, exclusion. By minimizing our facial expressions, monitoring our tone, we're reducing the variables people might misread. Ironically, that's often exactly what people misread. They assume because we have this bratty resting face that we're cold, distant, angry, judgmental. They ask, "Are you okay? Why are you being so standoffish? You're in a really bad mood right now." They make all these assumptions about us without actually exploring in a gentle and sensitive manner. I've had people tell me, "You look mad. You seem pretty annoyed right now." And the truth is, I'm just doing everything I can to not melt down in front of them. And I don't want to burden them with my overwhelm. So I kept it inside. And still, it feels like I'm getting it somehow wrong, that I'm disappointing the other person. And this is exhausting, to be caught between the need to self-protect and the constant misinterpretation of that protection as hostility or disinterest. This is why so many of us seem like we're shut down in social spaces. It's how we manage our nervous systems in environments that constantly demand more than we can give. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from this having to be too aware all the time. In social spaces, many neurodivergents are constantly running background scans. Is the other person annoyed with me? Did that joke land wrong? Was my tone okay? Do they think I'm weird? Should I apologize just in case? For many of us, this begins really early. We were kids who didn't quite understand the rules, but were punished for breaking them. We didn't pick up on subtle cues, we missed sarcasm, we asked inappropriate questions, or we said things bluntly, and people reacted with confusion, annoyance, or shame. People interpreted us as too rude, dramatic, sensitive, or difficult, and so we learned to anticipate the pain of this rejection. We learned that the safest way to exist was to constantly monitor ourselves, to preempt problems before they start, to apologize in advance, to script our thoughts in real time, to mentally rehearse a dozen versions of the same conversation before we even walk into the room. This having to live with one foot in the neurotypical world and with one foot in the neurodivergent world is like being bilingual, and you're constantly translating your natural way of being into something that reads as acceptable to neurotypicals. And when you get it wrong, even by accident, the punishment can feel swift and unforgiving. And what makes this harder is the rejection sensitivity that often comes along for the ride. If someone takes offense or misreads us or withdraws suddenly, we spiral. We often end up blaming ourselves. We replay every moment. We decide we're unsafe to be around. And next time we scan even harder. This is the accumulated weight of being misunderstood, misread, or mistreated so many times that you start to live in defense mode even around people who care about you. Instead of relaxing, you perform. You manage every syllable, every gesture, every pause, because you've learned that being yourself can be dangerous. If you're neurodivergent, chances are you've had the experience of saying something you thought was harmless or even helpful and watching the mood in the room shift. You didn't intend to hurt someone. You were being literal, or you're being playful, or just curious. But suddenly, someone is upset, or offended, or backing away, and you're left scrambling. What did I say? What did I do? This is where defensiveness kicks in. Because we've lived through this so many times before that we've developed protective armor. Many of us grew up without access to social nuance. We missed subtext. We didn't intuit context. We took words at face value and said things others found blunt or awkward or intense. And no one explained the rules. They just got mad or distanced themselves. So when it happens again, even in adulthood, it reactivates old wounds. We freeze, we panic, we try to defend our intentions. And sometimes instead of grace or clarification, we get criticism or rejection or silence. What follows is the shame hangover, that mental loop that plays again and again in your mind, revisiting every word, every facial expression, every misstep, wondering how you got it so wrong, feeling like you should have known better, feeling broken, defective, socially unsafe. These moments can stay with us for years. They confirm our deepest fear, that being ourselves is risky, that even when we try, we still fail to get it right. And that shame, it lives in our body. It lingers as hyper-awareness, as people-pleasing, as silence when we want to speak, as a hesitation before we hit send, because we're still afraid of being misunderstood again. Fear can teach us how to survive, but survival isn't the same thing as living. When you've spent years scanning for threats in every conversation, bracing for misinterpretation, and rehearsing your every sentence, social connection can start to feel like a minefield, even in calm settings, even with people you care about, even when nothing's going wrong. Your body doesn't know the difference. It still tenses. It still waits for the next social blow. Unlearning that is hard work, because it requires healing your nervous system, relearning what safe feels like. And that doesn't happen overnight, but it does start in moments. Moments where you say something awkward and someone laughs with kindness instead of condescension. Moments where you drop the mask a little and someone leans in instead of stepping back. Moments where you give yourself permission to pause, stim, fidget, cry, or just go quiet without apology or explanation. It starts when we feel people who don't make us earn our safety, who don't read silence as rude, who understand that flat facial expressions doesn't mean disinterest or anger, who ask questions that are gentle instead of making assumptions, And it deepens when we offer that to ourselves, when we let ourselves be imperfect, when we choose self-compassion instead of shame, when we remind ourselves, I'm not bad, I'm just wired differently, and I'm doing the best I can. Rebuilding safety means giving ourselves space to exist as neurodivergents without performance, to mess up and repair, to speak plainly, to show up without fear, to be visible even when we're not polished. Because you deserve relationships where you're not constantly managing risk. You deserve spaces where your differences aren't liabilities, they're just you. And yes, you may still encounter people who don't understand or who aren't willing to understand. But you'll also find people who do. And those people, that safety, that is worth waiting for. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and share it with anyone you think might benefit from my content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.